is the one in charge of this webinar, and I will be handing over to her very soon. I just wanted to welcome all of you and also to thank you all for joining us today. Um, uh, what the coronavirus has done is to bring us into some very strange times and very disruptive times, of course, but also very confounding times. On the one hand, people like us who live in Delhi, very polluted city, we've actually seen blue skies. And Antonia and Mr. Kajuna, when I tell you this, you will be quite surprised to know how, how much pleasure we got out of seeing the blue skies in our city, and how thrilled we were to to hear the sounds of birds in our city rather than the honking of cars. And the fact is, we got clean air, we got to breathe, we got an amazing ability to see what nature's glory is all about. But it came, of course, at an enormous cost, at a cost that is not something that we can say as environmentalists that our countries need to have. Too many people have died, and too many people in our world have lost livelihoods. Our part of the world is a poor world. And when people are in lockdown, when economies go in lockdown, it is the poor in our world that lose their income first. It is the informal workers who lose their income. It is all the people who run our transport services, who are in the informal sector, who lose their income. And that has been devastating on the lives of the very poor in our countries. So that is absolutely not acceptable. None of us can say that we want the lockdown because we got a chance to breathe. But the fact is that what the lockdown has done is to show us what we must do differently. And one of the areas that has become one of very important has become public transport. Because it is very clear that if you want clean air, then one of the most important determinants of clean air is to move people out of private cars and into public transport. That is absolutely clear, that we have to move out of private cars, get people to move, not vehicles to move. And only then can we get clean air. That is clear. But what is also very clear is that the virus has shown us, and this health pandemic has shown us, that public transport is the one sector which has become the biggest sufferer of the lockdown, because people are fearful of getting into the metro. Delhi's metro services are still shut. And the fact is that we need the metro because we are also understanding today the sheer importance of public transport. I mean, we have always seen cars on the road and believed that our city runs because cars run. Today, when there are no buses, when public transport is cut down, we really see the consequences of shutdown. And even now, when the government has opened up our country, in India, without public transport and effective running public transport, we are finding that we cannot get normal life in place. So today, the importance of public transport has become very clear. The role of public transport in getting clean air has also become very clear. And the third part has become very clear, that public transport also plays a very important role in livelihood support. Not only is public transport important for economic activity in a city, because it connects where the poor live to where the city business is, but it's also very clear to us that public transport is an integral part of the livelihood support system of our city. Whether it is the paratransit in every African country, or whether it's the paratransit transit in Indian cities, the auto rickshaw to the systems that you have, they're all driven by poor people who use these to build a livelihood. So it's an important part of the informal economy. It's a very important part of the economic system. And it's a very important part for the future development that we do in our cities, because clean air will not happen without public transport. And this is really where today's conversation is rooted. The fact is that we need to discuss this. We need to discuss how do we operationalize public transport in the crisis of today. What is the best guidance that we could give to managers who run public transport systems so that they can operate these systems today when the crisis, the health pandemic is there. But we also need to use this guidance to ramp up and to learn better on how we can augment our systems for the future. And that's really where the conversation is so critical today. And I say this, and I want to end at that. And I want to once again welcome and thank my colleagues for organizing this incredible panel of practitioners, managers, to come together for this conversation. I want to end with this point, that one of the most important things that the coronavirus has taught us, what COVID-19 has taught us, is that we really seriously need to look at our urbanization patterns in the world. I mean, the disease has told us that it is a great equalizer, that it will hit the rich and it will hit the poor. And if in our cities we continue to have people who live without the provisions of health care, of clean water, of clean housing, of garbage removal, and of public transport, then diseases will continue to grow. So it also calls for a different model of urbanization, which we can provide for all. And public transport becomes that link. Because at the end of the day, one of the most important things that the poor need today is affordable housing. And if they need affordable housing, it often cannot come within the city, because the cities are extremely expensive to build. But if we had good public transport systems that could transport people, you could actually build better well-being of people outside cities. You could actually think of growing villages into cities so that people could live there and come to work. But you cannot do that without effective, convenient, affordable public transport. And that's why the whole idea of public transport, and all of you who are in the business of public transport, to me, you are the most important people. You are the people who will help to show us what is the way ahead in this and how can we move ahead. So with those words and those words of introduction, I'm going to now hand over to my incredible colleague, Anumita Roy Chaudhary, and her colleagues who put this all together, for Anumita to introduce the panel and to give her presentation on the guidance document that CSC has prepared. Anumita?
Right. Sunita, that was an incredible and inspiring note to begin with. Thanks so much for this. It really sets the terms for the discussion today. And we are really looking forward to a very exciting discussion now because of the panel that we have. It's an amazing panel from Africa. And this Indo-Africa conversation, the South-South dialogue that we're talking about, is happening with the major players in the African continent today. And therefore, let me first introduce you to all the panelists who have joined us now. So we have with us Jane Akumu. All of you know her. I mean, she is the main Africa focal point in the UN Environment Nairobi. And she's helping and supporting all governments around the continent for all the action plans and strategy development for clean air, transportation, and technology roadmap. So Jane, welcome you. We also have Antonia Ekpa. She is, in fact, on her way to become the permanent secretary of the Road Transport and Mass Transit Administration, Federal Ministry of Transport, Nigeria, Abuja. An amazing lady. When I met her last in Abuja, she was also charged up with the whole strategy and roadmap for public transport for Nigeria. We have with us yet another, the champion of the cause. We have Abimbola Akinajo. He's the managing director, Lagos Metropolitan Area Transport Authority, Lamata in Lagos. I mean, running one of the largest BRT network in the world. It's really a pride of the developing world. And when we have been there, we have seen that system. It's so amazing. And you are really in the forefront today, trying to re-engineer and make the public transport work. And that's what we'd like to hear from you. We have with us Benon Kajuna, Director of Transport, Ministry of Works and Transport, Republic of Uganda, Kampala. And Mr. Kanuja, Uganda, I mean, today, perhaps that's the only country that I know of, has a national level non-motorized transport policy. So clearly you are heading that agenda and would love to know about this. And with us, we have Girma Genchu, and he's now the acting Director General of the Compliance Monitoring and Control Directorate, Environment and Forest and Climate Change of Commission, Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. Girma, I think he is about to join us, but he is the voice for clean air in this community. And we are also now waiting for Fiseha Mebratom to join. He's also going to join soon. He's the Director, Policy Studies, Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, Directorate of Federal Transport Authority of Ethiopia. And Addis Ababa particularly, where we are focusing quite a bit now, that one city that has a BRT, LRT, and an improved bus system. So clearly a lot to learn from you. So this is the panel, and I must certainly help my colleague Priyanka Chandola, whom you all know very well, and she has helped to put together this whole event, and she's done a great job. And my two other colleagues who have contributed to the content that we are going to share with you today, Sayan Roy and Shubham Srivastava. So with that, we begin the conversation today. So what I'll do, I'll very quickly go through the few slides just to kind of focus the discussion and set the questions for the discussion. So I'll just share my screen so you can see my screen. Okay, I try to get the full screen, but I'll begin. Slideshow. Maybe I'm trying for the slideshow, which is not happening, but I'll just start with this. So, as Sunita has already pointed out to you, the whole excitement of the blue sky when the pandemic hit. But pandemic or health emergency is certainly not the reason why we should be looking for change and get blue sky. What is absolutely essential for us to understand that, but what we saw, what we found during this period, this is really the time, what has helped us to imagine how clean our environment can be. Now, this is in India that caught our imagination. And when we looked across the African region, what was very clear at that, this is what we find. And it's the incredible change. It's really amazing. But question is, this is the public perception. This is what has caught people's imagination. But what is the data is saying? Now we do not have the real-time data, but there is certainly an eye in the sky. And when you look at these images from NASA that we have collected, we have analyzed, what you find before and after the lockdown, that how air quality in the continent has changed. So before the lockdown, January and February 2020, if you look at the continent, and you particularly look at the countries where you have high density, where the big countries in the region, and how dark the color is. And that's the pollution concentration. But look at the period, March and April. And what you find here, and that is kind of, it's lighter. The shade is much lighter than what it was earlier. And therefore, this is the direct evidence of that how air had cleaned up to a great extent during this period. Now, when we know that the continent already has a big problem of air pollution. In fact, the WHO's air quality database has already brought that out, that how many countries, many cities are already exceeding the standard. And when you look at the latest, the state of global air, because it's a public health crisis, something that we really need to keep in mind when we are charting the roadmap for the future. And we were quite stunned when we looked at the population-weighted annual, the health risk associated with PM 2.5, that among the developing countries, Nigeria is already topping the chart. And that shows that what crisis, the public health crisis that we are talking about. This background is only to highlight the point that why the very radically different approach is now needed after this initial disruption that all of us together have faced during the pandemic. Now, for that, let us understand some of the issues very specific to mobility. It is very interesting that today Google data on daily visits to different areas in our cities is available for different regions of the world. And when we looked at that data shows that how compared to a normal day during the normal period, how our daily visits to key areas like recreation, to grocery and pharmaceuticals, to parks, to transit trips, workplace, residential trips have changed. And when we look at it from country by country, look at Nigeria. What you see is dramatic reduction in the share of trips that are going to the retail, to the market, to the parks, to the transit, to the workplace. What has increased is the residential trips. So if reduction in other visits are in the range of 58 to 62%, but in residential areas, because we were locked down, we were working from home, the trips around those areas had increased. Similarly, in Kenya, where the residential trips increased by 32%, but other trips reduced by about 30 to about 60%. Similarly, if you look at another part of Africa, South Africa, a similar trend is emerging. Similarly, you look at Libya. Now, all these regions are showing that during the pandemic, because of the lockdown, because we were working from home, because there was such low mobility in our cities, and by type of visits, there was a dramatic change in the whole pattern of activity. And that has impacted on air quality as well, which is also showing up in the satellite imagery. If you look at specifically into the transit, because when people are using the transit, the buses, metro, and they have to visit the station, the transit station. And these are the zigzag lines, are the daily changes during the pandemic period across all these countries of Africa. And what you find from between the pandemic and during pandemic, I mean, there is a dramatic drop from the lowest from about 28% to in Zambia to highest, which is 92% in Mozambique. So that is the kind of reduction you have seen in mobility and in transit. Now, based on this, therefore, the question that Sunita also asked and that we are raising for all of you, that today we are reopening. But can we reopen by keeping the benefits of the lockdown? That is the big question that we are asking everyone. But we know that if the restraints that we have currently imposed on public transport, if that continues, then we will only end up seeing more personal cars, more personal two-wheelers, and that will be a disaster. So it's instead of a new normal, we will then go back to the old normal, and that should not happen. So therefore, what can we do? So this conversation today will talk about, we will see how can we learn from the South-South experience and the best practice globally to restart our public transport so that we can move ahead. But at the same time, we have to scale it up and scale it up with speed. But how do we do that? That is the biggest question in front of us at this moment. So what are we going to learn? So we know that in India, like all of you have done, there have been immediate steps to at least make public transport safe for use and operation. And as all of you have done in India as well, different transport corporations in different cities, they have also focused on hygiene, safety, sanitization, limiting service capacity, limiting bus capacity. They are stopping cash transaction. They are implementing strict bus etiquette, public outreach awareness campaigns, and even for the intermediate public transport, some steps have been taken. Now, globally as well, we see the same trend, whether you're looking at the global north or global south, but the same trend is emerging across the world. In this context, and which is we are putting out today, we actually reviewed that what different countries of Africa are actually doing today. And what is a very comprehensive documentation of the pandemic, the lockdown period in different countries of Africa, and what different countries are doing to operate their public transport system. And this also brings to you a comprehensive set of guidance on how to operate public transport that we will be sharing with you very soon. But this has also given us a very good idea. I will not give the details, but we have looked, and all of you are here with us today to share with us that what kind of action all of you have taken in Nigeria, in Ethiopia, and these are the different countries where we have seen that largely the focus is again on hygiene, physical distancing, and there are also penalties for non-compliance. So these are the range of action that you have taken, and we'll hear more from you on this. And very good, interesting part of this conversation is that you are doing this not only for the public transport, the formal public transport, what Sunita was mentioning, the poor, even the informal sector, and your matatus, the Bora Boras, and very clear guidelines have been adopted even for those who are, for that informal sector of public transport. Now, the big question is that one is what we have done in the short term, immediately, right now, so that we can make public transport safe for everyone. But what we have also understood, as we have experienced in India, the huge economic cost that now has been imposed on the public transport systems because they cannot perform at their optimal economic performance. And in India, we know that the traffic revenue is down by 48%. Now, the big challenge is how do we overcome this economic, the debacle, but at the same time, what kind of financial plan do we come up with to be able to support these systems to revive and also to take the reforms in the future, take that forward? Because as in India still requires close to 1 million bus. And how are we going to buy that? How are we going to augment the fleet? How are we going to improve the services? Clearly, we need a fiscal strategy for that. Even in Africa, we know that the Economic Commission for Africa is saying that it estimates that the the whole transport sector loss today is 2.5% of its annual GDP. Only in Senegal, we found one step, which even we have not done, where the government has allocated a grant to operators to compensate their losses. In Ghana, we have heard that fuels be made cheaper for public transport. Now, these are important steps, and we have to think through how do we do that revival. And from the global north, we know that, of course, they are taking much bigger step in London, in Hong Kong, and much bigger fiscal support packages have come as subsidy for both commuters as well as for the operators. And we will be learning more for that. While we are improving the public transport system, what has also emerged very clearly from the experience in Africa, as well as in India and other parts of the world, that we will also, that the whole focus is also shifting towards contact-free travel, which is walking and cycling, which otherwise we know is central to sustainable mobility. So we now need to move on that, and several action plans are evolving, we know, in Africa as well, and we will hear a lot more about it from you. In India, we know that there's just one city which has now opened up the streets, which were earlier shut to the cycling because of the pandemic. But we certainly want the Indian cities to become a lot more aggressive with this agenda, because our survey shows that people, even the high income groups, they're preferring to use to walk and cycle now, and we must leverage that opportunity. So it is amazing to see that how Kampala, Uganda, we know you already have a non-motorized transport policy, and you are already focusing on coming up with more routes and so forth, and we learn from you. We know that how even in Ethiopia, we have heard and we have seen that you actually have a safe cycling program now, and pandemic is catalyzing further expansion, and this kind of changes are already happening. And it's important that like Kenya and other countries have also shown similar interest, and we know this is a very big step forward, keeping in mind that most of the trips in Africa are less than 5 kilometers. And therefore, if we can provide a very well-designed streetscape, the network for walking and cycling, then we will be able to not only retain that modal usage, but also see phenomenal expansion in the future. It is a number that we really need to celebrate, especially like in Ethiopia, where the majority walk. Finally, what we're saying that globally now, what we are finding because of the pandemic, even the global north, the developed world, there we are seeing an increased interest in cycling now. The cycle sales have increased dramatically. We are beginning to see these pop-up bike lanes in these big cities of the world, and where they are repurposing traffic lanes, they are taking away spaces from parking areas and giving it to the walkers and cyclists. And this is and the clear-cut investments are being made. Now, that's the opportunity that we want to look at, because we already have a huge and a very big ridership in that. So the other strategy that we will look, because during the lockdown, a lot of us people, we stayed back at home. We are looking at work from home strategy, roster-based attendance. So all of these will also be important to look at, so that we can reduce the overall travel requirement in cities and reduce the pressure, not only on the stressed public transport systems, but also reduce the pressure to build more roads for personal vehicles. That is the much longer term benefit. We know that some of you will also be working very deeply now, along with public transport strategy, to improve the technology roadmap for vehicles, especially in African continent, where we know that we have a problem of old and aging vehicle fleet, and where we are still waiting to improve the quality of the fuel and emission standards. So that's yet another agenda that is on our table today. So finally, the agenda for the new normal, post-lockdown. I mean, how do we keep the gains of blue skies and clear lungs? And that's the big question that we're asking. My last slide, where I would like to say that this is what is the focus of the discussion today, that how do we restart and augment public transport system and service, build public confidence in public transport again. How do we have reform-based fiscal package and fiscal instruments so that we can help the public transport systems to revive and further scale up. At the same time, we want to adopt measures to alleviate pressure on strained public transport with other strategies. We must promote active transportation for short trip distances, which is going to be zero emission and reduce pressure on the public transport. We must plan to reduce travel requirements. And this agenda cannot wait. Even though it is a longer-term agenda, it's not a short-term agenda, but the work has to start right now. My last slide is this. This is already happening in Africa. Look at Nairobi and how they are transforming streets. Look at Lagos, where now more than 50% of the daily travel trips are being carried by the BRT and the buses. Look at Kampala, how they are again transforming the streetscape. And this is what you are doing right. And many others in other parts of the world, look at the photograph from Los Angeles, who have got it terribly wrong. So this is the opportunity. We must not let this crisis go waste. We must leverage this crisis to plan for the new normal and make the big change happen. So with that, I'll end here. And I will now request Jane Akumu from UNEP. Can you now share your thoughts with us?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Yes, Jane. Hi, Jane.
Hi, sorry, my video is not working. I understand that for this call, it's not being recognized. So thank you to CSC for organizing this discussion, quite a rich discussion and a rich panel. And definitely my discussion will focus more on the environmental angle because from the panel, we have the experts when it comes to, the operational angle of public transport, how to ensure that, the social distancing or physical distancing. So I will look at the environmental angle. And I will build on what Anumita, you said, the need to move to cleaner air and cleaner mobility. Of course, during this pandemic, we've seen a clearing of the skies for, I think, almost all the cities. And this just goes to show that transport is a major emitter or contributor to the small particles that are really harmful to health, and also black carbon emissions, especially when you're looking at public transport. So this is a chance to actually build back better by relooking at our mobility in Africa. So what I can say is that even pre-COVID period, we already knew the challenges that Africa is facing. And Anumita, you've already shown some of this. We know that even pre-COVID period, that public transport was not only inadequate in many of our cities, but also highly pollutive. If you look at the buses and the minivans that are already in operational in our African cities, they are at they have no emission control technologies, or at the most have, for some very few cities, maybe Euro 3 vehicle emission technologies. And today in the world, you're looking at Euro 6 vehicle emission technologies. When you look at the fuel quality, especially the sulfur levels in the diesel that is used in public transport, very high sulfur levels. And all this was contributing to a lot of the particulate matter and black carbon. Why is air quality quite important? We've seen initial studies that have shown that air quality, especially in cities in Spain, in the UK, in China, which were hit hard by COVID-19, the pollution levels were very high. With very high pollution levels, You get other diseases, the lungs, the heart diseases, do not function optimally. So a lot of the deaths that, were seen in some of these cities were linked actually to air pollution. So for Africa, this is a priority. We need to look at not getting to such kind of, dangerous levels. The second thing, pre-COVID, we already saw that despite a large number of people walking in our cities, over 50% in some of the cities, there's no walking and cycling infrastructure. Of course, the other issue was old technology, vehicles being imported, vehicles that are 15, 20 years old, not efficient, and were actually surpassing vehicle imports. Because of the failing public transport, 2- and 3-wheelers were being used, for public transport, and this is not sustainable. So what way forward, what are we seeing and what should we embrace? And some of these strategies, as already mentioned, have already started being implemented. And what is encouraging is that we are seeing some of the countries and cities including sustainable mobility in their economic recovery packages. So that is very encouraging. You showed a picture, Anumita, of Nairobi being retrofitted with non-motorized transport. That is part of the government economic recovery package. So moving forth, what would we like to see, and what are we, as UNEP, partnering with some of the countries and cities to do to move to cleaner mobility? So the first is soot-free buses. So we are partnering with some of the cities in Africa to look at cost-benefit analysis, energy demand and supply, to come up with solutions towards implementing soot-free buses. This could be clean diesel buses, it could be electric buses, it could be CNG buses. So this is something that we are supporting, particularly in West Africa and also in East Africa. Secondly, the need to link this public transport with non-motorized transport investment. This is quite important to link NMT to the public transport, and also to ensure that for short distances, non-motorized transport investment infrastructure exists. And we are partnering with some of the cities to develop non-motorized transport policies, to do street designs, to incorporate walking and cycling infrastructure. Thirdly, of course, the need to move to electric mobility. UNEP and the International Energy Agency and some other partners are collaborating on a global electric mobility program. We see this as an opportunity for Africa to move towards electric mobility, given that a lot of the cities, a lot of the countries are already using renewable energies. And this could be used for electric, to run electric buses, to switch to electric 2- and 3-wheelers. So this is a program that we are already implementing and supporting in some of the countries, about 10 in Africa, to transition. So it is important, even as we open up our economies, that we move towards cleaner, more sustainable transport modes. And these are some of the key areas that we are encouraging cities and countries to move towards. And definitely, we have to look at mass transit, because this is the most sustainable mode of transport. I think that's my intervention for now, Anumita. Back to you.
Ma'am, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jane, because this is really very encouraging opening remark. It gives us hope, and I'll come back to you very quickly to understand more about the recovery and how do we get the mobility and cleaner on our platform back. So now I'll request Antonia Ekpa, the Permanent Secretary now to be on the, can you share, Antonia, about the strategies that you are adopting now, and how are you looking forward in terms of your roadmap for the future?
Yeah, thank you very much, our dear sister and friend, Anumita. I welcome everybody on board, and Jane, I miss everyone. COVID-19 has actually put us all in our countries, and it's in a wonderful time, as much as challenging as it has been. Please let me use this opportunity to very briefly acknowledge the efforts of CSE over time. The Center for Science and Environment has been a very wonderful partner to Nigeria's transportation system. And we also want to thank our friend and sister Jane. The UNEP, United Nations Environment Program, has been wonderful. And I am speaking on behalf of the Minister of State for Transportation, distinguished Senator Gbemisola Saraki, who is now having a very important meeting with some of our stakeholders, all related to the reopening of our country post COVID-19. I think I just want to say very briefly that COVID-19 has taught us so much about what we didn't know. And one thing we have realized, actually, and it is a constant discussion for us in Nigeria, is the fact that we hadn't prioritized, as we ought to have, the road transport system. In our own climb, we have given some focus, actually, to transportation. But for us, the reality now is that road transportation needs much, much more support and modernization. We started very well by noting the fact that clean skies had emerged. Of course, in Nigeria, we always have clean skies somewhat. And we see the moon in some places, even Abuja, I saw the moon yesterday. But what happens actually is that COVID-19 has brought to our awareness the fact that we have to improve our sector. What we have done, and I give very much credit to the political will that has driven the interventions we have had. Political will at both the federal government level and at the state level. And it is important for us to acknowledge that our president has been at the forefront of driving the interventions in the in curbing the impact of COVID-19. And we have had a presidential task force made up of mostly ministers of the federal government and chaired by the secretary to the government of the federation. At the state level, we also have state governments driving the change. And it has helped us extensively because what that has meant is that not only the interventions in terms of funding, but also there has been a strategy and some coalition among the different stakeholders. At the federal level, the federal government gives out the national guidelines, and at the state level, we have state governments also having guidelines. And indeed, of all our 36 states and the federal capital altogether, 37, we have reported cases of COVID-19. It's only in 2 that we're having somewhat issues about whether or not this pandemic has reached them. But actually, Nigeria has had quite some impact. But we know that what we have done, especially, has been that we have experienced lockdowns. We had months of, several weeks of lockdown, which I believe has reduced the impact. And now we are opening the corridors, the road corridors for transportation. It is staggered. Just yesterday evening, the federal government announced that now we have interstate commuting. So you have transporters now moving from state to state. And this wasn't the case before. We were limited and we only had sectoral movements within the cities. And of course, beyond road transportation also, we are now opening our airports. But let me very quickly note that what the advantages I seem to see from what COVID-19 has done, notwithstanding the debilitating experience of deaths and frightening records of sicknesses, is that we have had to look again at our health sector and look again at transportation, which for me and for most of us is a carrier, as it were, of the COVID-19. If you don't move, you don't get it. That's what it looks like. So movement and of course mobility happens to be the core link between this disease and its transmission. So we are improving our road sector. And I also note also that interfacing the road sector is a health sector. And what government has done is that we while opening the corridors, we are also improving our motor park systems, which until now was just operating without stringent measures. So this for us is a big plus for us in the transport sector, because we work very closely with the relevant stakeholders, operators and riders and drivers of all types. And what this has meant then is that we have to look very closely at how do the parks operate. Until COVID-19, people just had their way. And but now we are putting in place stringent measures. We have to gate, as it were, some of our facilities. We are making provisions for cleanliness, much more cleanliness, and we are making also provisions for distancing. And within the vehicles themselves, just as a colleague in Uganda noted, now we have reduced the number of passengers in a car to just 4, or in some cases 3, the driver and 2 persons at the back. And that's, of course, you can't be in such vehicles without your mask on. And then also sanitizers in the hands and all of that. And our criteria guideline, which has been released by the ministry and it has been adopted by the federal government and to be made public and is being released strategically and in segments, is the fact that now operators have to be duly registered. We have been doing some registration of operators and for the purpose of contact tracing. We also are digitalizing. We had begun that, but now we have put in some more effort in digitalizing commuters, who moves and where are they going. And we have put in place some ICT-based interventions. We have the road crime control system, and we're also having from the interventions now a web-based recording of people's movement. So these are some of the things we have done. And we are also insisting that our parks should have water for cleanliness, washing of hands and entering of the vehicles, recording of our manifest systems have been improved, and we're looking at those very closely, that we have to know who is going where. And our ICT-based interventions, which we had begun before the COVID-19, have now been fast-tracked. And looking at also the interventions that government is giving, like was noted, the economic impact on the road transport system has been quite enormous for the operators. We envisage perhaps some kind of costs for the government, and it is indeed so. But government is also making some degree of interventions. The discussions are on to ensure that drivers and operators who lose passengers based on our determination of the number they can carry will have some kind of support. And also from what Anumita said and Sunita, the fact that the reality has come to us that the road transport system must be improved. We need some much more vehicles on the roads now. Public transportation is it. And like Jane has said, it's not just enough to have public transportation, but also green transportation. In Nigeria, we had begun emphasis on solar-powered tricycles, and of course, we also have our government at the highest level, the Federal Executive Council, giving us the National Action Plan, which the Ministry of Transportation has five interventions to or directives that we have to put in place to ensure that we clean up our cities and our transportation. So, and that directive came very early and in good time before the COVID-19 struck. But what it means then now for the Ministry of Transportation, working with all the stakeholders, especially the road transport operators and owners and all others, is the fact that we are not just going to populate the cities with vehicles, but we are going to populate with green and clean vehicles. And our cycling policy and all of those which we were slow at will now have to be improved, because I think cycling will, in my own estimation, reduce the interaction, a lot more interaction with people, getting into vehicles and all of that. I think that's what I can say for now as we move. Thank you.
And that's great, Antonia. Very insightful. We get a very good sense of how you have really handled the situation. But I'll come back to you now later, more on what the future is going to look like and how we look prepared for the roadmap. But before we do that, we certainly want to know about what Lamata is doing. Because in Nigeria, Lamata has such a big role to play in building up the whole public transport system in Lagos. And we have Mr. Desmond with us right now from Lamata. Mr. Desmond, yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, very well. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you, I can see you. So we are very keen to know from you, because the pandemic must have hit you very hard, and to operate the public transport system with all the restrictions that you have imposed, what does it mean? And in terms of performance, in terms of meeting travel demand, in terms of economic performance, if you can share that with us, that would be wonderful.
Thank you very much. Thank you for organizing this conference. I'm standing for the managing director, who is currently in the meeting. So I will take us through on what Lagos State government is doing and the way to redefining public transportation in Africa. As has been noted in previous comments, Lamata spearheads the public transport reform in Lagos. Now, we all know that the COVID-19, actually transport is one of the areas that was hardest hit, and Lagos experience is not a different one. What the government did, as we all know, was that in April, there was a complete lockdown, which affected the operators, affected the workforce, and affected everyone. And thereafter, what one of the operators did was, during the lockdown, they settled down at the depot to ensure the maintenance of those buses. That means they were quartered there, the people were quartered there, and they were being fed there, and to make sure that the buses were repaired in preparation for a reopening. And that was very, very insightful. Now, the state government initiated a task force, and this task force, or a team, was to ensure that the guidelines that were rolled out by the Lagos State government were implemented when the lockdown was relaxed. Now, what were these lockdown? Number one, what were the guidelines? Number one, the operators, they were to ensure that in the bus there was alternate seating. That means people do not sit if you have two seats, when one person takes a seat, the other seat will be left vacant in order to maintain social distancing or physical distancing. Now, that means that the operators were actually operating at about less than 50% capacity, which in other words affected their revenue. Now, there was mandatory use of the nose masks as well as hand sanitizers at the various big stations that were public places that were where people were supposed to pass through. And there was observance of physical distance as well as other measures that were to make sure that the COVID-19 was stopped in the state. Now, what has Lamanta been doing as an organization? Now, Lamanta, with the support of the state government, has been in constant advocacy to the public, to the operators, to educate them about the necessity to comply with state government guidelines. Because one thing is to institute guidelines, another thing is to ensure compliance. So Lamanta has been at the forefront of advocating state government guidelines when the realization was came into force after the lockdown. Now, looking at the directive again, there was this compliance to disinfecting the buses. You have to disinfect the buses, disinfect public transport infrastructure to ensure that they are free from every form of infection. And that was, and then also the matter as an organization was at the forefront of advocating that. Now, going forward, I want to talk more on some things that I feel we are doing and which I know that is going to redefine public transportation in Africa post-COVID-19. Now, we need to emphasize the use of technology. Technology is a key tool to help or to assist in COVID-19 era. Number one, we are talking about electronic ticketing, contactless card, to minimize contacts with people and to ensure that people have easy access without physical interaction. Electronic ticketing is one of the key things that technology can help to address in the PT, which we are currently implementing in Lagos, and which I feel is very important for other public transport authorities in Africa. Another area technology will play an important role is crowd control. Crowd control. It is easy to talk about how many people that get into public transport vehicle, but what of the station? How do people interact with station? So we need technology to monitor, to address crowd control at the station. Another area technologies is necessary is trip planning, where if you have a mobile app as a user, you don't need to really come to the station to wait for a bus or to wait for any public transport means. You can plan your trip from home so that once you come, you minimize waiting with other passengers, you hop on the bus and ride on to minimize physical interaction. Another key area that technology is needed, which will be of use to the African public transportation system, is maintenance management. We need some level of diagnostics, equipment. We need to carry out preventive maintenance. For example, if you are in a bus, a public transport bus, and it breaks down at the middle of the road, when a bus breaks down, it will create room for physical contact among the passengers that are in the bus. But when buses of public transport equipment are well maintained, it will certainly reduce breakdown that would result to transloading, to physical contact amid the journey. Now, we also need to talk about multimodal integration. Lamanta is embarking on a program that will ensure that all the modes of transportation are integrated. Number one, we have the rail project that is going on, the blue line, as well as the red line. And we have the bus reform that is going on. And now in this bus reform, we are also talking about the first mile and the last mile. That means we are looking at a transport system that takes people from the main corridor to their doorstep. In that way, you are minimizing physical interaction. You are minimizing physical contact and thereby curbing the spread of COVID-19. And then we are looking at the fact that with this multimodal plans and arrangement, that technology is of importance in terms of using one card to transverse all modes of transportation. We are also integrating water transportation in our plan because the current system takes water transportation, we take rail transportation as well as bus system, including first miles and the last mile that take people to their to their very particular doorstep. Another thing that is important in this very particular era is marketing to rebrand the image of public transportation. Now, a lot of people are scared because public transportation creates room for convergence of people, creates room for interaction. We need to rebuild people's confidence through marketing to rebrand the image of public transportation to the users. Now, what are we going to be talking about in the rebranding? Number one, we are talking about increased cleaning protocols. Increased cleaning protocols. Now, when we are talking about cleaning protocols, a vehicle, for example, before boarding is disinfected. And now, after operation, that same vehicle is disinfected. Public transport infrastructures being disinfected. We need to communicate all of this to passengers, all of this to our users, so that they will know that public transportation has now embraced a new cleaning protocol that enhances the hygiene of what is going on, and that it is not going to be a means of spreading COVID-19. Another key thing that is important is the development of the capacity of the public transport workforce. How do drivers manage passengers? How do ground staff manage passengers? How do we interact with passengers? So we need to look at public transport workforce capacity development in the management of passengers. And then we also need to think about having some head officers, public transport head officers in our various organizations on how to manage information, on how to manage passengers, on how to manage COVID-19 related issues. So we also need to talk about rebooting, redefining public transportation network. In some cities in Africa, our public transportation network are quite duplicative. Some public transportation network are quite not in sync with destination. And that makes a lot of people that when they come out, when they come down from a particular public transportation facility, they still need to take some distance to get to their destination. So we need to look at how do we reboot, how do we refocus our public transportation route network, number one, to connect populations, to connect employment centers, to connect leisure centers, to connect various centers where destination is a prime dominance. So we need to look at how to rebook our public transportation network. Another key thing is increase in frequency. We are looking at schedule, we are looking at rerouting, Now, how do we increase frequencies of public transportation facilities to ensure that we have minimal waiting time? Because the more people wait at the public transport network or at the public transport station, the more crowd you have. The more frequency you have, the less crowd you have. So we need to look at how do we improve, do we increase frequencies, steady frequencies, so as to decongest crowd, so as to manage crowd at the various public transportation network. Now, I also need to round up by saying that Lamanta is introducing, Lagos State government through Lamanta is introducing about 550 buses into the transit space in Lagos in the next couple of weeks. This is to ensure that the mobility needs of the commuters are met. This is to ensure that some of these things that we are talking about are actually addressed. So in the next couple of weeks, Lagos State government through Lamanta is introducing over 500 buses, high capacity, medium capacity buses to run various destinations in Lagos State to ensure that the mobility needs of the community public is met. Now, another key thing I also want to mention before I finally round up is we need to look at how do we manage body and alighting to minimize body interaction. For example, if you have a public transport facility, rolling stock, and they board and alight from the same door, certainly you cannot minimize body interaction. You cannot talk about physical distances when passengers are boarding and alighting on one single door. So yeah, we have to look at body and alighting management, where passenger board right at the front door and they disembark at the rear door. It will minimize body interaction and it will also enhance physical distances, which is one of the key guidelines that almost globally that is being advocated to curb this COVID-19. So on this note, I say that Lagos State is on top of it. Lamanta is working assiduously to ensure that public transport in Lagos plays a dominant role in COVID-19 recovery and normalization. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Desmond. I mean, that's very insightful. And we really understood, how you have responded and so nimbly to the whole situation. I'll come back to you again. There are a lot of questions. I can see the question box now. Before that, I would like to request Mr. Kajuna from Uganda to share. Can you please share your thoughts? So after the whole discussion, then we are going to take up more questions. Mr. Kajuna?
Yes, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Yes, allow me to share with you what Uganda is doing. Can you read my slides?
Yes, I can. Yes, we can see your slide.
Very good. Thank you very much for inviting us to participate in this discussion. To thank the Center for Science and Environment for organizing this meeting. Thank my colleagues, panelists, and participants. Say that in Uganda, the cases now is at 889. And to say that we don't have any deaths so far. And the recovery is about over 700 people. For us, we are saying that to fight this pandemic, we have to have two issues very clear. One is clear leadership. Another one is discipline. to make sure that we follow the standard safety operating procedures. My presentation outline, I will give you the introduction. I will talk about the impact of COVID on public transport. I'll talk about the initiatives which are being given by the government of Uganda. I'll talk about the effects of these initiatives. I'll talk about the future expectations, and I'll talk about the way forward. Yes, currently Kampala is about 4 million people. During the daytime and at night, we're about 1.5 million. About 95% of the cargo and 99% of passengers, they move by road. And we find that the transport system is made up in such a way that 21% of 14-seater omnibuses, they transport about 82.6% of the passengers, and 36.6% are private vehicles, which transport only about 8.8% of the passengers, and 42.4% are motorcycles, the famous border borders, and they transport about 8.5% of the passengers. We don't have a BRT transport in Kampala. Following the declaration of the COVID by World Health Organization pandemic and the rise of infections in Uganda, the government undertook a number of measures. And these measures are mainly to curb the COVID-19. The measures which we undertook was suspension of public transport, including the buses, taxis, motorcycles, passenger trains, and passenger flights. All those were actually suspended. And there was enforcement of curfew between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m., in which all movements of people and vehicles were stopped, except cargo vehicles. And we find that the government has since followed a phased approach in easing of the lockdown, and public transport in particular has been allowed to resume, but under strict restrictions that vehicles will transport only half of the licensed seating capacity, among others. And passenger trains and passenger flights are all still suspended. What is the impact of COVID pandemic on the public transport in Kampala? The measures undertaken by government of Uganda to curb the spread of the COVID, to minimize infections to a manageable number, and the majority of infections in Uganda are attributable to the goods vehicles that move across the borders. Because Uganda is a transit country, trucks move from neighboring Tanzania, neighboring Rwanda, neighboring Kenya, and that has been the conduit through which the virus has actually been moving. However, the measures also had a big impact on transport and the economy. And the main impact is the increased cost of doing business due to high transport costs. We have had reduced productivity in the country as people could not get to their places of work, apart from the very few essential staff. Loss of jobs, especially in the private and the informal sectors. Disruptions in supply chains, which caused shortages in the economy. And the vulnerable people, including the disabled and the people with chronic diseases, actually suffered a lot because they were unable to get public transport for them to access medical services. Also, reduction in revenues in terms of tax and non-tax revenue, reduction in the quality of life, increased income inequality in society, particularly in Kampala here, increase in domestic violence due to economic hardships. Even when public transport resumed, the fare was too high due to the condition that public transport vehicles should only carry 50% of the licensed seating capacity. So people started now fighting for vehicles so they can be able to access the facilities. However, we have some positive impacts which have been recorded as a result of the measures. One is the reduced accidents due to reduced movements and the enforcement of the curfew from 7 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. We used to have a ward for border accident victims. These are motorcycle accident victims. We no longer have that one. Now it's actually empty. We also have reduced crime because now people cannot be able to move anyhow at night because there's a curfew. We have increased the use of non-motorized transport, including walking and cycling as an alternative to motorized public transport. Really find that now people cannot be able to use public means because they're not there. People are very many, so they are actually moving, despite the challenges of not having well-structured NMT facilities. We have improved air quality in the central business district due to the reduced emissions from motor vehicles, and there is increased importance of use of ICT in transport to address logistics and distribution challenges. And of course, the positive note is also the increased use of technology-based solutions to carry out work, even in the lockdown, such as what we are actually doing now. If it was not this coronavirus, now would either be in Nairobi, in New Delhi, or where. But now we have come to sit down and say, let's use technology to be able to do our business. Now, what are some of the initiatives by the government of Uganda? The government allowed gradual lifting of the lockdown to kickstart the recovery of the economy while preventing unnecessary exposure of the public to the infections. Now, what we have done, we have developed standard operating procedures to allow for the resumption of the movement of the people. Mainly, the public is advised to only use public transport for essential travel, and the use of public means and non-motorized transport are actually encouraged. Also, the public transport operators were required to ensure adequate social distancing in the vehicle, and they should also carry half of the licensed seating capacity. Also, another initiative is all persons using public transport are required to wear face masks at all times. The moment you enter the car, even when you're outside, you must be well able to wear a face mask. Public transport operators are required to regularly disinfect the vehicles prior to every trip. All passengers are required to wash their hands with soap and sanitizer before boarding public transport vehicles. And all public transport terminals are required to check the body temperatures of any person before accessing the terminal. And long distance buses are also required to fill and submit passenger manifests with terminal management at the beginning and end of each trip. Government also has used the lockdown to plan and implement measures for reorganizing of operations of these 14-seater matatus or taxis and borders or motorcycles in Uganda. Here we are doing the registration of all taxis. We are assigning them the routes from where they start from and where they actually end. They are also required the taxis to print and put a number and the route details on the body of the taxis, and also the demarcation of the taxis of the motorcycles exclusion zones where borders are not allowed to operate. We are saying they shouldn't be in the central business districts. Yes, government is also studying the innovation by motorcycles operators aimed at preventing the spread of COVID-19 between the rider and then the passengers. What are some of the effects of these initiatives? The initiatives by government have allowed for the steady recovery of the economy by allowing the movement of people and goods without unnecessarily exposing the country to infections. This is very, very critical for us because the more you expose yourself, the more you are liable to be infectious. It has also allowed the country to have manageable infections And also the high transport costs has in some way restricted the movement of people to only essential travel, which has further curbed the spread of the virus. What are some of the future expectations in the transport sector? One, we have to increase in the use of technology and new innovations, especially those that are ICT based to address mobility and agility. We have to have a paradigm shift to NMT transport by the public. Luckily enough, Uganda, we have an motorized transport policy, which was approved in 2010, which we actually implementing. Now, we have to look at the increase in demand for water and rail transport to shift cargo from the roads, and the emergence of gig economy with emphasis on flexible work schedules and working from home is actually being emphasized. The future expectations also include the increase in the use of green transport systems with low or no emissions, such as use of bicycles and also using electric cars will also be used. Increase in the use of cashless transactions, such as mobile money and other innovation. This morning we had a meeting with MTN. We are trying to look at modalities where people using public transport do not hold cash, need to have cashless movement where people are supposed to only pay through mobile money so that they cannot easily get this disease. These trends are expected to reduce the carbon footprint of public transport, and the government will accordingly invest more resources to foster these trends. As we move forward, the government will invest, as I said, in the development of the ICT infrastructure to facilitate public transport, to allow for booking online, control movement of vehicles in the event of restrictions, and to improve logistics and distribution. The government will continue embracing technology. Government will use lessons learned and modify the standard operating procedures to able deal with the future recurrence of similar pandemic and similar disruptions. Government will invest in the development of green transport modes such as NMT, and as Anumita said, a pilot had been done by government even before the COVID pandemic. This is in the central business district of Kampala, and people are actually using it very well. However, the lockdown greatly enhanced the importance of NMT, especially to the public. The government plans to develop NMT facilities along all major routes, starting from the CBD, going to, let's say, 10 kilometers radius within without the central business district. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I thank you very much. And let us all embrace the new normal so that we can be able to promote public transport. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kajuno. What I really found fascinating about your presentation is how you use this occasion and the opportunity to assess so many different changes that happened because of the pandemic. I mean, to be able to assess that how even crime rate had gone down, how accident rates have gone down because of less movement. I mean, these are powerful evidences to drive change. And also the fact that you use this opportunity to build your non-motorized transport infrastructure. These are certainly very big lessons for everyone in the developing world. So from here, and I'm, it's unfortunate that our two colleagues from Ethiopia, I mean, they joined, but somehow they are facing a lot of network issues and they're not being able to rejoin. So we are still hoping that they will be able to connect both of them. So please bear with us. And but let's take the conversation forward. If they're able to join, then we will certainly hear them. So let me also tell you now that there several questions have come our way, and they would want the panelists to reflect on those questions. But I must also tell you that it's just not Africa, but the entire South Asia listening to you. And I'm seeing questions coming from Bangladesh, from Nepal, and that just shows the level of interest that there is today in this issue in the South. So let's take this conversation forward. So one very interesting question that has come from a friend, Henry Kamau, from Kenya. And he's actually asking, and Jane, I would like you to reflect on this, and I would also ask other panelists to reflect on this. And Henry is asking that informal public transport operators in Kenya were initially quite enthusiastic to adopt social distancing, hand sanitization, and ensure that all passengers wear masks, etc. But because they are facing economic hardship, they do not have enough resources to mitigate against the losses to support the cost of the mitigation action quickly. So that has kind of eroded the enthusiasm. And that, and now this requires police enforcement. So he's asking, so what should government finance the COVID mitigation measures? How should we support the sector? And I think that is a very critical question that is coming from several participants in this webinar today. Jane, would you like to take that up first?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Henry, for the question. But I will leave it also more for the bus operators because of the cost. And I think the cost issue has come up quite loudly in the presentations. We know that for Africa, public transport is price sensitive. And that's why you saw with some of the measures already put in place with reduced capacities, the public transport operators said they were going to increase their fares just to be able to meet costs. And a lot of people started walking. And a few actually, like for Nairobi, we're seeing more people also cycling. So public transport is price sensitive. And I think that's why it is key for governments to come in and finance some of these measures. So if you look at the developed world, why is public transport efficient? Why is it on time? Why is it adequate? It's because of governments are involved. It's not really left to the private sector to operate on its own. Governments are involved. And I think I know a lot of governments are trying to get out of, subsidizing public transport. But I think this is a time when some of the post-recovery finances should be put back into supporting the efficiency and the smooth operation of the public sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And I'll take this question forward. Maybe Antonia, if you can also reflect on this, and I will also ask Mr. Desmond and Mr. Kajuna. And before you respond, I would also like to tell you that there are a couple of other questions that have come. One I can see from Bangladesh. And here Mr. Ziaur Rahman of WBB Trust in Bangladesh, he's also asking that how do you build back better? And the critical question is that because the whole cost of recovery, how do we deal with that? So if you can, all of you, address these two questions. So Antonia, if you can take up the first question first and then reflect on the second one, that would be great.
Yeah, basically, I think what I need to say here is that in Nigeria, I am aware that the federal government of Nigeria, and I believe also some of our states, have realized that there is a cost content to the COVID-19 situation, and that transportation has suffered. But I think the people who are most affected by these, apart from the fact that commuters suffer because we don't have adequate number of vehicles to transit people from one place to the other, the owners and operators of these vehicles have had to lose passengers. And government is making provision in different sectors, and we are having banks, federal government establishments and banks being put together to make some kind of relief for the transporters. Quite a robust intervention, I must say. And this is being coordinated at the very highest level of government. Our government has set aside quite some sum in trillions, and in billions rather, to resolve these challenges that we're having in the sector. And so government has done something, and we know that as part of that is to also populate the cities with vehicles. And I did say earlier that we have a mandate by the federal government of Nigeria for us to clean up the cities with vehicles that are not emitting CO2. And we also are putting together with, of course, discussing with the stakeholders, the transporters and operators, and at the state level as well, discussing right now as I speak, our Minister of State, who is responsible for this COVID-19 intervention at the ministry's level, is discussing with honorable commissioners from the states on how we can work together towards achieving this intervention. Yes, please. Okay.
Great. And it's good to know, I mean, that you're already working on a package. I mean, that you're thinking.
Absolutely. And it's a big intervention, I must say.
Yes.
And it runs into billions for each of the units and operators and all of that. And government wants to also ensure that the private sector keys into this. Jane did speak, and that is what we're doing. And as you would know, most of our transportation in Nigeria, road transportation especially, is by the private sector. And so there is a good intervention which is leveraging on very coherent collaboration between the private sector and the federal government.
And that is an amazing learning curve, because we are also trying to figure out how do we do it here, but we still haven't got the template. So if you do it, then India and the entire South Asia will really benefit from that, the pilot that you are going to do. That's fascinating.
So, thank you.
So would love to know more about this later. So now I'll move on to Mr. Desmond, because you are actually running the system. And how do you look at the economic challenges of revival? Because when you are operating the system and you have already laid on the table the very big plans, and they are very impressive plans that you have, exactly the way we must run our systems with good technology, IT system, operate the services efficiently, ensure frequency, manage overcrowding, all of that you said. I mean, that's exactly the vision that all of us should have for transport operation. But given the current economic challenges and the fact that you are operating your system at lower capacity with limited and restricted capacity, which is affecting the revenue, now how do you therefore foresee overcoming that challenge? What role you feel that the government should play, and what are the economic instruments that you can adopt that will help you to tide over this challenge? If you can help to reflect on that, that will be great.
Okay, thank you, Anumita. First of all, some of these things we are discussing about cannot and will not be able to be implemented without adequate funding. What we have done in Lagos is we have granted a fair increase approval to the private sector, because number one, they are operating at lower capacity. And in order for them to be able to recoup cost of operation, maintain their buses, and sustain the operation, they need to charge an equilibrium pricing, an equilibrium fare in the first instance, so that they can be able to remain in operation. So what the government has done in Lagos State as a first aid intervention is to grant approval to these operators to increase their fare. And in Lagos, for example, we have two categories of operators. We have the informal operators, we have the formal operators. The formal operators are the regulated operators. They are required to run services on schedule. They are expected to run services on predetermined or predefined parameters. But we have the informal operators that are informal in terms of ownership, informal in terms of operation, informal in terms of their organization. Now, what we do is to ensure that, because the informal operators, it is the market that dictates their pricing. When COVID-19 was, when we relaxed the lockdown, they were charging high pricing because when we told them, don't carry full passenger, don't carry full capacity, you can only do 60 capacity, you can only do below 50 capacity, they all came up with a pricing for that. So, but when the lockdown is being relaxed, their prices came down. So what we are doing is to benchmark with the informal operator because their pricing is actually market sensitive. And therefore, the regulated operators came together. We look at what they are charging, and then we have to benchmark everything. So the formal operators and the informal operators, they have actually hiked their fare. So that is first aid intervention. Now, the second intervention was to provide some level of subsidy to the operator while we are waiting for the bigger subsidy from the federal. What we have done is to quickly provide some kind of a soft landing fund to support the operators so that they will be able to sustain their operations. Now, another thing we are looking at is you will note that there are some international donors, international organizations who have realized the effect of COVID-19 on public transportation. We have received an offer from a international technology provider, solution provider, to grant us some deferred payment in the deployment of their technology, like the ITS, like the automatic vehicle location, like the central intelligence system, like all other scheduling suites. So we are currently in discussion with international technology provider that have offered Lamata, knowing that the COVID-19 will pose a huge challenge on funding innovations. So we have received an offer from them. They are offering a kind of 3-year deferred payment. And they say, hey, we can take this on board, improve your public transportation, then spread the payment for 3 years. So we are in discussion with them. So these are some of the some of the strategies that we are putting in place to support the operators and to ensure that the operation is sustainable in the midst of all these challenges.
Great. I mean, what is amazing that you have thought through in detail the strategies, and that's where the learning curve is for all of us. So I'll come back to you again. And now, Mr. Kajuna, there is a question, there's a lot of curiosity today, and particularly now that with the COVID-19, so much interest has now got generated in the active transportation, walking and cycling. The question is that now that this requires new investment for you to establish new network of walking and cycling lanes. Now, is government consciously thinking about linking your economic recovery package with walking and cycling infrastructure implementation? Can you reflect that a little bit on that? Or do you feel that because of the economic challenges, it may slow down, that the investment in cycling infrastructure, walking infrastructure may slow down? Or are you saying that no, it will still be prioritized and can be taken forward as part of the green recovery process?
Thank you very much, Namita, for that question. Yes, as I said in my presentation, the government of Uganda prepared the NMT policy in 2010. We have gone ahead to prepare the guidelines, and now it's a requirement in all projects to have NMT facilities for walking, for cycling. The implementation is a bit low, but I would like to report to you that during the several speeches the president has been giving in the fight against this coronavirus, he has been emphasizing the issue of having NMT facilities put up so that people can be able to walk, people can be able to cycle, to use bicycles. And actually I'm saying that the more you walk, the more you become physically fit. and the more we shall not be able to face these emissions and the rest. So now the onus is on us as government to make sure that in the recovery program of government, the budget is put there so that the facilities, NMT facilities are actually put in place. As I said, our transport system in Kampala mainly is actually informal. People do walk a lot. People who walk are very, very, very many. But this is not business as usual. We are looking at people having business continuity plans so that they can be able to cope up with the situation. Yes, what I can say is that yes, the government is determined to make sure that in the plans we are able to put in funds for the NMT facilities and NMT plans. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kajuna.
Hi,
So, two questions. Jane, I think this will interest you a lot because one question is, they're saying that we have inadequate buses, but our buses are also old. And there is a pollution challenge there as well. Now, within the context of that question, and you have reflected already on how you are looking at the technology transformation in the future, taking this as an opportunity of moving towards electric vehicles and also speeding up the technology roadmap for vehicles. Can you reflect a little bit more on this? That where are the opportunities today? What can we really do that the pandemic, instead of slowing down that process, can actually help us to establish new level of ambition? Is that possible? And how do we address that?
Thank you, Anamita. Actually, that's a good question. And I also see that some of the participants had already raised some of the issues, like how do we build back better? So we've heard from the presentations all the way from Lagos, and I know it's also happening in Kampala, it's happening in Nairobi, it's happening in Ethiopia, where the governments and the city authorities are looking at expanding their bus fleet. As I started, I said, public transport is not adequate. There's no really, complete network to support movement, mass movement in our cities. However, it's important to, as the cities are planning to acquire more buses, to acquire, for such movement, it's important to look at the bus technologies. So as I mentioned, Nigeria said they're looking at acquiring 500 new buses. What buses are these? What is the technology? And it's quite important that already they've talked, Nigeria has talked, Lagos has talked about embracing technology, using cashless, technologies in operating. These buses will be with us for the next 20, 30 years. So buses are long-term investment. So what kind of buses are we looking at? And especially looking at towards reducing emissions. As I mentioned, the buses that we have today, they are predominantly Euro 0. some of the cities that we're seeing, like in Dar es Salaam, those buses are Euro 3. So Euro 3 is still not where the world is. When you compare ourselves with some of the cities in India, some of the cities in China already have embraced quite high vehicle technology standards, vehicle emission standards. Most of these countries are actually also embracing electric mobility. Our cities have a lot of renewable energies. Like, for example, Ethiopia is powered 100% from renewable energies. So electric mobility gives us an opportunity to have local energy supplies and also reduce emissions. So this is quite important, that as we are talking about strategies to expand our public transport, we look at what this transport means, and then also looking at embracing cleaner technologies. This year, just before the COVID hit Africa, at the beginning of the year in February, the ECOWAS Commission organized a ministerial meeting, bringing together the 15 ministers of environment from the ECOWAS region with the energy counterparts. And the good thing is that the sub-region agreed to move towards cleaner fuels and also have Euro 4 vehicle emission standards on a minimum. This is for heavy duty vehicles as well, so buses. So from January next year, only Euro 4 vehicle technologies would be allowed into the sub-region. And the fuel quality import would be at maximum 50 parts per million. So already sub-regions are moving towards harmonization of fuel, harmonization of vehicle standards. And for me, buses present an even better opportunity to embrace these cleaner technologies. So even if the sub-region is moving to Euro 4, for the buses, they could actually even embrace Euro 6 technologies, electric technologies. And some of these cities are already looking at these opportunities in Abidjan, in Dakar. We are working with them to look in Accra to look at some of these options of electric buses. Thank you.
Jane, you have done fantastic work from UNEP on the whole old and used vehicle import in Africa. How do you think that agenda will be taken forward now?
So as I mentioned, it will be on a sub-regional basis. The ECOWAS has already, ministers approved a move to Euro 4 and a maximum of 5 years for light duty vehicles import and 7 years for heavy duty vehicles with a 10-year grace period.
Okay, that's the combination.
Yes, East Africa is working on this. And this year, we are working with some of our partners to look at, through the UN Road Safety Trust Fund, to look at having an international standard where we have importers and exporters agreeing to some minimum standard of used vehicles being imported into Africa. So some of the vehicles imported are actually, not acceptable. So we are working on having a regionally agreed international standard that for Africa to start with, that vehicles being imported into Africa or being exported into Africa meet some minimum requirement. So it's something that we are working on. Thank you.
That's a great news, Jane. I mean, very encouraging to see this development. And I just hope this will remain on track. So that takes me to the next question to Antonia. You are working so deeply now on the national strategy for transport. And you're also looking at, we would like to know something about this now, that in the new normal, in the post-COVID era, how do you expect this policy to take shape? And within that, the technology question, which is very specific to Nigeria, that you also have a very strong interest to exploit your natural gas reserve and build a CNG program. So Antonia, if you can reflect a little bit on that, that would be very helpful. Can you unmute yourself, Antonia? We cannot hear you.
Okay, sorry. Let me start by introducing this document. This is our Federal Ministry of Transportation guidelines for post-COVID-19 interstate reopening document or policy, quite robust, and all that my brother from Lamata has spoken, we have also taken cognizance of that. But I think very briefly, going on to what you've just said, Jane is aware because we're working very closely with the Minister of Environment and indeed all the environment-related subsectors and agencies of government to ensure that transportation, Nigeria's transportation, as you well know, you've researched extensively, and let me congratulate you again, and Jane, on all the efforts you've done towards ensuring that Africa and Nigeria in particular, because of our population and of course, our emitting of so much of unwanted gases, you have done a lot in that area. And the ministry has keyed in quite extensively in the last 4 years. Congratulations again also to the present government that has bought into this. Basically, the federal government has a strategy, and that is housed in the environment sector. We have a national action plan to reduce small gases that emit all manner of unwanted pollutions into our environment. So the National Action Plan has 22 strategies, our action plan, and the Ministry of Transportation has 5, one of which is that we have to introduce CNG, compressed natural gas. And you know that we have gas in our country. And so what the Federal Executive Council demands from us, and we are working very much on that, is that we should harness the gas infrastructure that we have in the country and the supply that there is in the country to introduce compressed natural gas to our public transportation. And we want to thank CSE again because you gave us the opportunity, I personally and some of our colleagues, to come to India and see the fact that almost all, if not all, of your public transportation is driven by compressed natural gas. So we have adopted, our federal government, the Federal Executive Council has adopted that, and the Environment Ministry is driving that. So we have a timeline of before 2025 to ensure that this is done. And there are many sectoral partners who are working on these. And UNEP, Jane's team, are very much with us. As we speak now, the World Bank, very happily too, I got an email yesterday, which I passed on to my minister, that they're considering e-mobility as a leverage for Nigeria and more importantly for our cities, because our cities are quite polluted. And it's frightening really how much, especially the bigger vehicles, the trucks and the tankers, what we call the tankers here. And of course, we are eliminating some of or removing some of the vehicles that have caused most of this pollution. Part of that directive from the federal government at the very highest level is that we should ensure that we partner, that is the Federal Ministry of Transportation partners with the Lagos State government to ensure that the mollues, that is those very old vehicles that pollute our environment, are removed. And I'm sure the Lamata brother would say, our brother Bimbola would acknowledge the fact that Lagos has done so much in this regard. We are also considering, like Lamata has done, some of our routes for us to introduce bus systems that are similar to the kind of things that they have in Lagos. We are having issues with congestion. And of course, you know that one of the outcomes of congestion is pollution. And so we're working on this very strongly. And we believe, I personally am very, 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 very passionate about green transportation, and we don't have any other alternative because lives must be lived and lived happily and clean. And so we're working on this with the ministry and other partners. Our environment team is very strong on this, and we are hopeful that before 2025, Nigeria will be clean. If not altogether, significantly clean. And we are very hopeful too that with the kind of engendering and energy that President Muhammadu Buhari, very happily we have such a passionate leader, is having, and the encouragement we're getting from the Minister of Transportation, much more will be done by that timeline. We look forward to it and still lean very strongly on your support, CSE, and on the support of others like Jane. And we are also very much with the ECOWAS team. Of course, we have several of our protocols in Nigeria linked to ECOWAS, and the Minister of Transportation has a serious responsibility to drive the implementation of these protocols. And we sit, Jane was with us in 2018, I suppose, the whole of December. She walked us out. Jane, you recall, she walked us out trying to develop the Clean Air Initiative, fuel emission policies for West Africa. And the whole of our 1 week to Christmas was taken up by Jane and ECOWAS in 2018, all in an effort to ensure that we ensure this is done. And our customs colleagues also have been very strong in supporting this government initiative. In total, really, what has happened is that we have a very huge coalition now. In the last 4 years, it's been tremendous. And going on to the 5th year now, that government is on top of this issue at every angle. And not only that resources are being made available for us to achieve this, but government is ensuring that the timelines are met, and we are working. We just hope that with the grace of God, we will get Nigeria clean and green, and very much so. Thank you very much.
That's an amazing sense of hope, Antonia. But in the meantime, a very specific question has come for you.
All right.
This is from Billy Edwin Philibus, CEO, Logistics Transport Service Limited. It's asking, what policy document and legal framework do we have for private sector involvement in the post-COVID guidelines implementation? So would you like to comment on that?
Okay, hi, Billy Philibus. Well, we have, like I said, we have these documents. The Federal Ministry of Transportation has brought up a guideline, and we are working. It's important that I bring this up. The Ministry of Transportation now, driven by the Minister of State, is looking at us having our own very specific mass transit policy to supplement the national transport policy on national transport policy. So our mass transit policy, which we are putting up together, we're putting together now with all stakeholders, and of course the university professors of transportation are very much in sync with us in this. We have all our stakeholders, and private sector people like Billy Philibus are welcome to please give us information or guidelines or input into what we're doing, because we are hoping very shortly that as soon as that mass transit policy, thank you again, CSE, we have discussed with you, you're interested in assisting. UNEP also, let me use this opportunity also to thank UNEP and Kali in UNEP has been Kali Koinant, now she has a new name, I have to learn that. So she's been helping us, and we're having a coalition of stakeholders to develop a robust mass transit policy that we can take to the Federal Executive Council and the National Assembly to have a legal framework whereby we will strategize on how to achieve all the things that we're doing, because you see, it's obvious that when you don't have the regulations, you can't effectively coordinate your reforms. So we are working, and all the interventions we're having on green transportation, fuel emission, and all of these, we're pushing them into this mass transit policy. And what set us back a bit was the COVID-19 and the lockdown and all of those. But we're back, and we're speaking, and we're working. And as I speak now, the minister is looking at some of these submissions that we've given to her, so that we can bring together around the table, whether virtually or otherwise, how much COVID-19 will let us to bring up this policy in the shortest possible time. So, Billy, please be rest assured that we are working on regulations, and we will get them into laws. And don't forget also that we have other bits and pieces of regulations here and there for urban transportation and mass transit. And of course, our colleagues in the Federal Road Safety Corps, the VIOs in the states, and other units are all with commissioners in the states also. We have been able to bring ourselves together to form a formidable team, as you would say, for mass transit policy. Nigeria is running on mass transportation. We have our rail system now, even though we haven't yet opened it. That's on the way. But it is obvious to us, and to anybody who cares to know, that road transportation is it. Well, and I say that passionately and proudly, that when the air transport was locked down, and rail transport was locked down, and sea transportation was closed for us in the riverine areas, the road was still working. People were still driving, however few, and people were still walking. So we can't underestimate the value that road transportation brings to economy, to our lives, to our health, to everything, to farming, to whatever, agriculture. It is road, and road is at the center, and we just have to lift it above all the others with time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonia. So now that we are nearing the end, so what I'll do, because I see this one specific question for Desmond Lamata, I will ask that question quickly, and then in the last bit, what we'll do, I'll just ask each one of you to give your message that about the new normal that you would like to see, and how would you want that to shape up. So what I'll do, Mr. Desmond, there is one specific question for you. You have actually answered some parts of it already, but still there is a very specific question about that how Lamata would still expand the BRT network given the economic downturn. Will economic downturn be an obstacle to further expansion of the BRT network and its implementation in Lagos? That is a specific question that has come for you.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. First of all, Lamata, in a bid to ensure that transport programs and initiatives are coherent and coordinated, developed a strategic transport master plan. This strategic transport master plan identified 14 big ROT corridors, identified the rail line, and all other associated transport initiatives. What we have done is, from the year 2008, we started the first big ROT, March 2008, and in November 2015, we launched the second Bay ROT, and next month, July, as part of the strategic approach of His Excellency, the Executive Governor of Lagos State, we are launching the third Bay ROT next month. So, somebody asked a question, what type of buses are we talking about? The buses we have brought on board, over 500 of them, they are part of the high-spec European buses, Euro 3 for now. And these are the buses we are using to commence the BRT next month. So considering the situation, the economic downtime, global challenges, in the midst of all this, Lagos State government is assiduously and with all stakeholders' involvement driving the expansion of the BRT. May I need to say this also, that Lagos State government has received from the donor country French Development Agency some fund for the development of quality bus corridor. And these quality bus corridor are going to be connected to the BRT as well as the rail system and other public transport network.
Right. So, Mr. Desmond, then why don't you give your last message? Okay. I mean, very quick, very briefly, that what is that key change? What is that key strategy that you want to see for the new normal post-COVID as we move forward?
Okay. Well, my message is clear, or where we are heading to. It is, like you rightly call it, it is a new normal. A lot of things as it affects public transportation would actually change in terms of organization, in terms of users management, in terms of rebranding the public transport system, all of that, they are going to change to fit into the new normal. Now, what I will expect is policy makers to reflect this in policy decision. Policy maker to reflect in policy decision, and then also allow private sector to play dominant role in transport investment. Government cannot do it all alone. We need private sectors, we need donor agencies, we need stakeholders management to come on board to support this new normal and redefine the public transportation in cities and in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Desmond. Fantastic. Mr. Kajuna, your vision, what is that critical change that you want to see? And what key strategy you think you will bat for that is going to make it happen?
Okay, thank you very much, Namita, for that. First of all, I would like to thank my colleagues for the good presentation, and to ask my colleague Antonia Ekep from Nigeria for that document. I don't know if there's a way we can share that document, the post-COVID document online. I'll be very, very grateful. Now, this is not a new business as usual. It's a new normal. We have to embrace it. And first of all, we need to save lives. That's very, very critical for us. And we need governments to develop the strategic plans for the new normal, especially for the public transport. I think it should be a very good message. Let's develop new strategic plans for public transport for us. Walking and cycling, of course, must be promoted. And another thing is that we must strengthen our standard safety operating procedures, especially in the public transport domain. And I'm also saying that we need to bring the health practitioners, the Minister of Health, the transport system, so that we can be able to have a multi-sector approach in fighting this pandemic. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kajuna. Jane, would you like to go next and say that what is that Pan-Africa vision and the Pan-Africa strategy that we must focus on as a priority to move forward and for the new normal?
Thank you, Anumita. I'd also like to thank the CSE for organizing this webinar and for all the panelists. It was quite a rich discussion, and thank you for all the questions that have been raised by the attendees. What I'd like to say is that this is an opportunity. We are seeing, sort of like a resetting of mobility in Africa and also, globally. We are seeing a lot of investment being channeled into mobility. And this is an opportunity to fast track cleaner and more sustainable solutions. So with all this investment being channeled, it's an opportunity. What we had seen before pre-COVID is that a lot of our cities, a lot of our mobility was growing not in a sustainable manner and not in a clean manner. So this is sort of a reset button and an opportunity for us to build back better and definitely embracing cleaner technologies. And for me, cleaner technologies, when you talk about, soot-free buses, when you're talking about electric mobility, these are also greener solutions. So there are opportunities to create jobs when you're talking about, using local energy. When you're talking about electric mobility, there are a lot of components that can be actually built locally. So these are opportunities to also, tie in green technologies to green jobs. So for me, I'm quite excited at the opportunities and at the opportunity also of fast tracking these solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. That gives a great sense of hope. Antonia, your last word. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, thanks, Anamita. Well, basically, we've been reforming, but COVID-19 has given us a new approach. We are reforming our reforms. And so, and so what it is actually is that we are re-strategizing. And going forward, as we have already said, it's an intermodal approach. As you would have seen, COVID-19 has affected all the subsectors of transportation. And for us in the ministry and with our aviation colleagues, we're looking at very closely how we can work together to ensure that greening the environment is not just only for the road. Principally, the federal government of Nigeria has gazetted the National Air Quality Control Regulations. So we have that. These regulations have provisions for emission standards for various types of vehicles even. It is also at the verge of rolling out its vehicular emission control program driven on a public-private partnership basis. It will provide green jobs as well as good air quality for Nigerians. And like I have already said, and Jane has emphasized, we have spoken widely, and our colleague in Lamata has also said, we are working very, very closely. We have a timeline, and the federal government of Nigeria is driving not just the health sector, which is primary for us to stop all the deaths that we have heard outside Nigeria, and we have some also recorded. And sadly for us, the numbers are coming up in Nigeria with COVID-19 spreading even up to the domestic and local levels. So we are working very hard, and we have set for ourselves a very serious agenda, and we will work on this, not just on the COVID-19 policy, but our national transport policy is being revised. And with the mass transit policy, we are hoping and we are working towards bringing together virtually and otherwise our sectoral partners. And because of COVID-19, we've not been able to have our annual road transport and mass transit operators and stakeholders conference. But we are hoping the COVID-19 reduces. If it does not, we are going to have that at a virtual level. And these interventions we are talking about are still going to be drummed up and trumped up by us at the ministry level. And the federal government, I'm very happy, is very squarely behind us. My brother Bimbola from Lamata I'm very happy to see you on board this morning. We have to talk some more. Thank you for all the support you've given to us in the ministry. And we are very, very proud of you and your team in Lamata. Lagos State is it, and Lagos is it any day and any. It's our pride and joy as Nigeria. And we will work with you very closely. The ministers, as you know already, they're working with you in the rail sector in Lagos. And the road sector, the Minister of State also is driving this. And we're going to work together. And the beautiful thing about what COVID-19 has done for the government is that at the national level, the federal government has put together a team of ministers from all the sectors, and governors and all those people are all together working, as a team. So that collaborative leadership is utmost, and we can't but have that. And if we continue with this collaborative approach to managing COVID-19 and we extend it towards other sectoral interventions for road, and in fact, intermodalism in Nigeria just has to work. It hasn't been very effective, but we are very sure that going forward, and for me, that is where we are going, and we will achieve, and we will achieve. Thank you very, very much. I'm proud of you, CSE. My sister, Jane, thank you. I have met a friend today, Kajuna, and Sukanya Nair. We're very proud of you. Priyanka, thank you everyone for bringing us on board. We'll get across to Priyanka the soft copy of this, our policy, so that they can circulate to other stakeholders. And you have already put together the Africa document. I hope you will have a revision where you can push in the Nigeria one. Thank you so much, and God bless you. Thanks.
Thank you, Antonia. And let me thank each one of you. The words that what we've heard from you today, it gives us such a great sense of confidence, because even though we are going through an amazing crisis, an unprecedented crisis, but I'm not getting any negativity out of it. In fact, from everything what you have said, from everything that each one of you are doing right now in that continent, it just brings out the leadership of that continent, that it has not dampened the action. And despite the crisis, despite the obstacles, that your roadmap is there and you are moving forward. And what is amazing about this whole conversation today, very rich conversation, that when I look into this virtual room and see everyone who is present in this virtual room or on YouTube or on Facebook today, right now, listening to you, it's just not the people from Africa. It is also people from Asia, South Asia, and other parts of the world listening to you right now. And just shows that how much what you have said resonates with everyone. And this is about the South-South, the common challenge and the imperatives that all of us are in it together. In India, we are fighting our battle. We are also trying to do and working on some solutions, but we are also looking at the global learning curve. And the biggest learning curve is for us right now is actually in Africa, what you are doing. That many of these experiments, many of this innovation, the responsiveness that you have talked about, lot of that can actually inform our action here in India to deal with the mobility and the transportation strategy post-COVID. Now, from everything that you have said, it's also very clear that we cannot go back to the old normal. It is about new normal. And the template is there. The roadmap is there. Now we need inventive, more innovative solution so that we do not allow the economic crisis to overpower change, that we can find and sidestep that crisis and find innovative economic solution to push for everything that you have said. So with that, I would like to thank all of you, Jane, Antonia, Mr. Desmond, Mr. Kajuna. Wonderful to have you here. So glad that you could spend this time and have such a vibrant conversation today. I would like to thank everyone who asked questions, who heard us today in the virtual room. Without you, this conversation, this dialogue would not have been possible. And yes, Priyanka and Sukanya, you are there and for your very strong anchoring of the entire program, and all my colleagues in CSE. Sunita is not here right now, but yes, to her as well. With that, a big thanks to everyone, and just hoping for the next conversation that we can build very soon. Look forward to that. Thank you once again, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.